Hello and welcome to Penmanship, a podcast about Australian writing culture. I'm your host, Andrew McMillen, and before I get to today's guest, I wanted to share some exciting news about an upcoming event that is taking place at the 2017 Canberra Writers' Festival. I'll be recording an episode of Penmanship with Catherine Murphy, who is political editor at Guardian Australia. This is a free event that will be open to the public, and it's taking place at the National Library of Australia at 10 a.m. on Saturday, August 26th. You can find more details about this event at penmanshippodcast.com/live or by following the podcast on Facebook or Twitter. If you're in Canberra, I'd love to see you there. If you're not in Canberra, you'll be able to hear my conversation with Catherine Murphy when it's published later this year. Now to today's guest in episode 40. Since he began as a cadet journalist at The Age in 1984, fresh out of high school, Gideon Haigh's main subject areas in journalism have been in sport and business. For most of his career, Gideon has worked as a freelancer, and his writing has been published in more than 100 newspapers and magazines around the world. As an author, he has written 32 books to date, with at least 2 more underway. The breadth and depth of his body of work is simply astounding, and I've been an admirer of his for some time. During the last few years, my main understanding and appreciation of Gideon's writing is through his role as senior cricket writer at The Australian, where he has become one of the most read and trusted voices in sports journalism. In late July, I met with Gideon at his home in Melbourne's inner city, and was led into his writing room, which is also home to his extraordinary collection of thousands of books. Our conversation touches on why he prefers not to think too much about the structure of his books before he starts writing them, how he goes about writing daily cricket match reports for The Australian each summer, how he has managed to avoid becoming cynical about cricket despite writing about it for decades, how he decides which writing projects to pursue as a freelancer with several sources of income, and how he found himself occupying a sort of public service role in late 2014 as the nation came to terms with the shock death of a young Australian cricketer. The conversation begins, however, with a small discussion about the purpose of this podcast. Introducing Gideon Haigh, author and freelance journalist.
So what are you trying to get from them?
It's about working with words for a living.
Okay.
What are the intricacies and ins and outs of actually the mechanics of doing that? So there's no real single answer to this, hence long rambling conversations.
No, there's not. I'll be quite interested in what I say too, because I've been doing it for so long that I have very seldom questioned the way that I do it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've been a journalist since 1984. Since I think February the 4th, 1984, when I joined The Age out of school. So I've never held any other occupation. I've been freelance since 1995. So as I say, I'm a member of the self-unemployed. And I don't know, somehow it kind of gets done. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it's going to get done, but I tend to stumble from one deadline to another and something emerges at the end, and maybe if I don't think about it too much, I'll carry on doing that.
Right. Well, we're getting ahead of ourselves. I'll introduce you.
Okay.
Gideon Haigh, thank you for joining me. We are at your home.
Thank you for joining me, Andrew. You've come all this way.
Not a problem. It's a pleasure and an honour. I want to start by asking you about the room that we're in.
Okay.
It's a podcast, of course, people can't see it,
Right.
but describe the room we're in.
4 walls, mainly consisting of books, 2 windows, a door, an overburdened desk, a power book on the desktop, various research cues lying around on the desk, a golf ball, an analog phone, a hole puncher. Yes, multiple pictures of my daughter and my wife.
Mm-hmm.
lot of junk that I'm not. Now I look at it, what on earth is it doing here? Really?
What is this?
That was given to me by a friend of mine, Andrew McMillen, I think I'd done him a few favours, and it's called The Deal. But Andrew thought that it resembled an umpire's index finger, so it was appropriate to a writer, one of whose subjects is cricket.
Indeed. How many of these books, roughly, would concern the topic of cricket?
That wall.
Yeah?
The wall behind me.
Wow.
It's all quite systematic. If you want me to explain the
please do.
The MO. Okay, we have this is the cricket wall. We have humour up in the top left-hand corner. We have history more or less in chronological order in different countries. State association histories, instructional books up there, annuals down there, a row of wisdoms, anthologies, biographies and autobiographies in alphabetical order, tour books in chronological order, literature in alphabetical order, magazines down the bottom. Over here we have fiction in alphabetical order. Down the bottom, for no particular reason other than there was space, there is office architecture, which is a subject that I was very interested in for a while. Behind us we have books about medicine, books about psychiatry, books about science and natural history. We have music books on the next row. We have global history, British history, American history, Asian history. We have military history on that row, leading down to an area on Eastern Europe. We have Australian history along that row. We have biographies in alphabetical order on the next three rows. We have business and commercial books on the penultimate row, and finance along the bottom row, including various banking histories. Over here we have philosophy, theology, politics, big books that don't fit anywhere else. Yeah. Down there we have dictionaries, encyclopedia, travel books, other works of reportage. Out the door we have true crime.
I just realised there's books on every staircase leading upstairs.
True crime, journalism, memoirs, poetry. Around there we have business textbooks, business biographies, and quite a lot more about offices, which I am extremely interested in, or at least I was for a few years.
It's an extraordinary collection. It's not even a collection, it's a library in itself. The cricket one in particular is striking. It's got to be one of the more comprehensive libraries on cricket books.
It's all right.
In the world,
yeah.
I would think.
It's useful. It's a user's library. They're all there because I want to be able to reach for them.
Yeah, they're not for show.
Yeah,
they are
no.
a form, a central part of your research and
writing. And I'm a very systematic reader. I'm a great annotator and a great dog-earer of pages. So if I think, there's that thing in that book, I can usually be relied upon to find it within a few minutes. And I'm extremely perplexed when I cannot.
So what you mark as you go through with a pencil or a pen?
Pen, pencil. As you can see, I'm midway through reading that book by Jim. I'm reading that book by E.M. Cioran. Anything I like, I'll mark, because I might want to go back to it.
Yeah, you dog-ear the top corners.
Yep.
And that indicates something caught your fancy.
Yes.
Like a sentence or a phrase. Or...
Yeah, I like that. Anne Fadiman talked about the distinction between carnal love of books and courtly love of books. I'm very much in the carnal camp. I want to devour the book. I want to make it my own. I want to appropriate it. Courtly love is more about kind of venerating the book and treating it as an object of worship. But I'm a consumer, and what journalists do fundamentally is they accumulate facts and they grind out prose. in my case, it is quite a mechanical or at least intuitive process.
What's your reading diet like? How do you sort what you're reading on a week-to-week basis? You've got a few books on the go here.
Yeah, it tends to get geared to the project that I'm involved in. I want to read around the subject. I want to read in the period. I want to read something that kind of gets me into the frame of mind to think like the individuals that I'm writing about, to maybe hear their voice or to hear what their voice might have sounded like. Or there's just something that I think I should read. I think, I've always heard that guy's an interesting writer. I should go and read some books by him. I have periods that alternate between fiction and non-fiction. I tend not to read I read no sort of contemporary fiction at all. It's a terrible oversight and an admission on my part, but it's just not where my head's at. I read purposefully. In that sense, I'm not a particularly eclectic or certainly not a recreational reader, and I ration my time quite scrupulously.
Not recreational in the sense that you don't do it for pleasure? What do you mean by
Oh, it's all pleasure.
Yeah.
It's all completely self-indulgent, but it needs to be focused. I need to feel that when I have finished the book, I will be improved, better informed, a better reader and writer as a result.
Do books only make it to any of the shelves you've just described once you've finished reading them?
Yeah, I would think so.
So the ones that you moved ahead of my visit today were unread?
No, they were books that I had picked out of the shelf to browse in. And, I've often got a multitude of different things on the go. And, as I was going through them, I realised that, I was looking at that about 3 or 4 weeks ago for a column that I was writing. What's it doing here? That's ridiculous. So your coming has been quite hygienic
right.
as far as my environs are concerned.
Pleased to be of service. I think I read somewhere that at one point your collection of books weighed 5 tons.
That was about it, yeah. When we moved out of the house, we renovated in 2011, I had to put almost all the books into storage. And as the removalist told me, you've got 5 tons of books here. And that was actually one of the underpinnings of the renovation process, because I was becoming a little bit apprehensive about the fact that I had these on the first floor rather than the ground floor.
Yes, that's a lot of weight.
Yes.
There's load-bearing structures underneath.
It's a much more robust building now.
Okay. Well, tell me what you're working on right now. Where are you? It's like Friday afternoon in late July.
Right.
What is occupying your headspace in terms of writing?
I'm writing Chapter 8 of a true crime book. Crime from the 1920s and set in a kind of an artistic milieu in Melbourne, and so I'm doing a lot of reading around that subject, different aspects of it, and I'm turning that into prose. That's the corn for my mill, which I'm grinding.
Is this a well-known crime?
Hopefully it will be by the time I write about it.
If you don't want to describe it, that is totally fine.
Yeah, I'm a little bit superstitious, but I'm doing a lot of interesting research. It's very stimulating. And it's like a lot of books that I do, it's kind of developed a life of its own. It's not the book that I really set out to write. I sort of rely on the subjects to tell me the way to do it. You often set out with I have very unclear ideas when I look for subjects. I just feel as though I'd quite like to do something in this area, and I might try 3 or 4 things, and maybe 3 of them won't really work, but then the 4th thing will go, that's interesting. I can connect that to those other things that I have also thought about, and that will lead me into an area where I don't know very much. I do like areas where I don't know very much, where it's new and interesting and challenging.
How do you pitch that to a publisher then, when you don't know what you're doing at the start necessarily?
Well, I'm quite good at selling things off the plan, as it were, or the non-plan in my case. And I guess after 32 books, people do get that you're going to deliver. And I've never failed to deliver, even early. I usually deliver early.
Wow.
And I'm a journalist. You know, I'm constitutionally geared to having something at the end of the process. I don't write for... Well, I write for pleasure, but I don't write for the bottom drawer, if you know what I mean. It's always with publication in mind.
Mm. Have you ever kept a journal?
No.
Never written about your private life and thoughts just for yourself?
For a period in my sort of late teens, early 20s, but I got bored. I got really bored of myself. In fact, I remember quite vividly dropping the pen in the middle of a sentence and never picking it up again. I didn't even bother to finish the sentence. I was boring even myself.
What happened to that journal?
Somewhere here. I don't think I've thrown it out, but it's just somewhere in a junk pile.
You said you're working on chapter 8.
Yeah.
Does that mean, what's your outlining process for the structure of the
I don't
book?
do any outlining at all. Well, actually, in this case, I did a one-pager, and I haven't looked at it since I did it. About 2 months ago, I thought, okay, I've got a ton of information here. I really need to think about how I'm going to do this. So I'm going to sit down for a day and I'm going to do myself a one-pager. And I did it, and I haven't looked at it. I'll be interested to see what it looks like when I go back. It's by no means the only time I've done that too. When I did The Office, which is a very big book with 20 chapters in it, I remember writing a one-pager at the very start of the process and never looking at it again. And then about a year after the book came out, I found it, and I thought, God, this isn't anything like I thought it would look. But it guided me, that subject. I just followed my intuition.
There is a power tool operating outside, which we can't avoid, being in the inner city.
It is.
But maybe you could sit a little closer
Sure,
to the
yeah.
microphone while he's going.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about your whole career. You actually have one of the best one-line bios of any Australian writer I'm aware of, which is,
Really?
a few years ago it said, Gideon Haigh has written 30 books, 20 of them about cricket. So succinct.
That's about right.
It's so succinct and perfect. I love it.
I kind of run out of things to say after that, though, because I don't do very much else. I play cricket. I'm played 275 games at my cricket club, and I'm on the committee there, and I'm a life member, and I'm a father of one with my wife. But there's not a lot of time left over at the end of that.
Well, your cricket writing is what I am most familiar with for The Australian
Yeah.
in the last few years. Tell me about how that fits into your life at present, because it's not the cricket season for the...
No.
It's not summer yet.
No, I'm out of contract at the moment. I have contracts for summer, for the Oz, sort of from the start of October to the end of March. I'm contracted to deliver a certain number of pieces.
Per week?
Usually per week, but there is a kind of a total at the end of it. I don't think I've ever bothered actually counting them up. I always deliver too many.
Over-deliver.
At the moment, there is this very interesting players' dispute going on, so I am writing just as a contributor. I've let the sports editor know I've got something to say, and he says, fine, shoot, and I do that on a casual basis. But I'm not contracted to deliver anything to the Australian at the moment. I'm doing it because it's interesting and because I feel as though on a subject like this I should be saying something.
Well, yeah, the players' dispute is something that I, as a casual cricket fan, essentially have ignored for the last few months.
Yeah.
Until you wrote a feature for the Australian Inquirer a few weeks back, which was wonderful because it put a lot of historical context and importance around the issue. Because you start by visiting, where was the location?
Yeah, the Cricket Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
At the MCG.
You were wandering around it, or at least describing yourself wandering around it.
It was funny because I didn't know what exactly was there. I'm on the Hall of Fame selection committee, and I was at the MCG one day. I was talking in the Rare Books Week, and I actually said I should pop down to the Hall of Fame to see what's there, because I knew that Monty Noble and Victor Trumper and players of that era who had been at Holtz with the board were represented, and I was interested to see whether there was any artefact of that, and of course there was. There was that terrific letter which I quoted at the start of the piece.
And yeah, your expertise was the way in for me as a casual reader to say, this is how the present connects to the past.
Yes.
And it took yourself, Australia's best cricket writer, in my opinion, to make that an issue worth reading about for me. So thank you.
Yeah, well, I think every story that you write has a history, and sometimes we're impervious to that as journalists. We're such creatures of the present that we spend very little time trying to educate ourselves in the context of a story or the system of relations that exists between the dramatis personae. And I'm acutely sensitive to that where cricket's concerned, but it's always been a part of the process for any kind of long form writing that I've done is you kind of set out to create a chronology, just a simple, banal chronology, something as commonplace as that, and it just enables you, it orients you in an unfamiliar territory. It becomes your own kind of roadmap. Just a habit that I've always gotten into because I find it interesting to do. And when you do something like that, the more information you accumulate, the more sense it begins to make.
Your byline at the end of that piece for Inquirer read something to the effect of Gideon Haigh has written X amount of books and also wrote the history of Cricket Australia, which is interesting because the piece was somewhat critical of Cricket Australia. It was. Well,
actually, it was the stand last, as they call it, was actually that I'm the official historian of Cricket Australia, but I'm also a grassroots cricket player. It pointed out that I'm a life member of my cricket club, and I made that point because it's not a particularly subtle point, but a lot of this players' dispute has been couched in terms of the necessity to do more for grassroots cricket. So I do see it from that perspective. The curious thing is that Cricket Australia and the various administrative bodies have, to the grassroots level that I play, been almost total strangers for my entire life. So it's nice of them to suddenly express an interest, but I do wonder whether it's a matter of convenience rather than commitment.
So what you're saying is you don't see many Cricket Australia administrators at the South Yarra Cricket Club?
No. But I do like to tell them occasionally that I am a cricket administrator myself. So I do understand, in some respects, the balance that is necessary between the interests of the current membership and the traditions that you hold dear and the future expectations and prospects of the club that even someone like myself has to strike.
When you are reporting or filing daily reports on cricket test matches during the summer, what are the mechanics of that role for you? Where do you sit in terms of watching the game? What's in front of you as the game unfolds?
It's funny, I haven't done that for a while. Oh, that's not true. I went to India to do some cricket there. Well, a lot of it is, I mean, you sit in the media centre. I sit next to my colleagues from the Australian, Peter Lawler, Wayne Smith, Andrew Faulkner. I just sit there and watch the cricket and move paragraphs around the screen, and at the end of sort of round about tea time I panic and think, what am I going to say about this? And then something gets done and I press send about 20 minutes, half an hour after stumps, and I immediately regret everything that I've written and wish that I could start over again. I come back the next day hoping that I'm going to do better.
So you take your laptop with you. Do you take longhand notes? Any kind of?
I tend to write on the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to see how things look. You wouldn't want to study my writing process too closely. It's a bit chaotic, and you try out a lot of stuff. You write it down, you look at it, you think, well, that doesn't really work. Or then suddenly something that you've written is made to work by something that happens on the field. It's interesting. I did a piece for the Night Watchman, the long form cricket journal in the UK, about writing columns. This is in 2015, but I did it while I was watching Mike Atherton write a column. I was staying with Mike at his home, and he was writing his column for the Times. And I thought, well, as a kind of a thought experiment, I'll write my piece about writing columns while he's sitting at the other end of the kitchen table. And it was quite funny to look at how we both did our respective jobs. Mike started off with, sort of 1.5 ideas and connected them to an anecdote and then to a bit of history and then to a quote. And I thought, well, this is actually what I do. It's actually more interesting to watch someone else do it than it is me. So we sort of wrote simultaneously, and when he filed, I filed. It was a fun piece to do.
Similar length?
I think I wrote a bit more than Mike, but it was easier for me because I did have a few sort of inchoate thoughts about the process and about the relationship between, because it's changed quite a lot in the time that I've been writing. The relationship between the written word and the other forms of media in which you're enveloped, because you're in a very sort of media-rich environment in the press box. You're constantly being bombarded by other stimuli. There's a television screens, you might be listening to the radio commentary, you might be reading something online at the same time. I'm not on social media, but I know another lot of journalists follow social media quite closely. You don't go naked and innocent into reporting a day's cricket anymore. A lot of your judgments are influenced by other factors, other sort of media epiphenomena around you. And of course, although it's not in my case, a lot of it will be shaped retrospectively by what the player says, the daily player says at the post-match press conference. There is a kind of a hero of the day in cricket. The best performer is paraded before us, answers a few banal questions, and invariably their quotes run high up in the day's match report.
What are you like in the press box? Are you laser focused on every ball, watching with binoculars, or are you open to distraction from your colleagues or other sources?
Well, I have some very entertaining colleagues.
Yeah.
Peter Lawler is a very funny man to go to the cricket with. In fact, sometimes he's more entertaining than the cricket itself. I do watch quite closely, but I watch certain things quite closely. Like I'll pick out a certain player and I might watch him for 10, 20 minutes just to get an idea of to get a sense of what he may be like, or to get ideas about how to describe him. Because I think one of the gaps that cricket writing now has to fill is the idea of what it's like to be there and to have an independent gaze. The vast majority of viewers of a day's cricket will be completely beholden to the visual choices of the producer and the remarks of the commentator. And if you sat down and you looked at the way in which cricket was presented, it's really writing history with a 1-ton pencil. It's pretty unsubtle, and it's pretty mandatory. You have to listen to what they're saying. You have to watch what they want you to watch. I think cricket writers should be leaning a long way in the opposite direction and savouring the live experience and enjoying the opportunity to cast about at leisure. That's certainly the way in which I approach it. Ideally, I'd like the experience of reading my column. And this is going to sound pretentious, but it's well meant. To be like sitting next to an interesting companion with some kind of understanding of the before and after of cricket, with some sense of a cricket conversation taking place, because cricket conversations are wonderful conversations. You have so much in common with your fellow conservant. There's so much scope for agreement and for disagreement. That's what I have always gone to the cricket for, what I've always liked most about it, and what I'd most like to convey to my readers.
Well, if that's what you set out to do, you achieve it beautifully. Last test season, last summer, I don't think I saw a ball of any of the matches, but I read all of your reports the day after, and
okay, thanks.
They're just so engaging and incisive, and it's like sitting next to someone at a bar who knows a lot about a particular topic. That's why I come to you for cricket, because you have so much knowledge and you can summarise the events of 6 or 8 hours play like few others can.
Yeah, there are lots of days where there's not an awful lot to say. There's a lot of 6 for 300 days in cricket where it's kind of pretty even. There's no obvious narrative arc for you to follow. But that's what creates such tremendous writing opportunities. It really is. A day's cricket is really a wonderful canvas.
Are there days where it gets towards the end of the day and you wonder what the hell?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And how do you combat that? Because you have to file something. You
do have to file something. Look, I've never had any difficulty filing. I've always filed on time. I've always filed to length. If the present isn't interesting, you go into the past, or you go somewhat to the side, or you concentrate on the scene, or you look at the context of the series, or you look at the context of the relationship between the countries playing, because that's a level of, or a layer of sports writing that cricket has a particular connection with, this idea of sort of head-to-head confrontation between nations. And because a lot of cricket time is spent in repose, there is a lot of time to consider the possibilities. Interesting. I don't think they're present in writing about T20 cricket. I've absolutely no idea how you would write a T20 match report, and I hope I never have to find out.
That's a good point. There's so much sound and fury.
Well, everything is geared to the outcome.
Yeah.
Everything is influenced by the outcome.
The last over.
Yeah.
Usually. Which
is ridiculous, because often the outcome is the factor of a completely chance event.
Yes.
But everything is written sort of in retrospect from the conclusion. I've actually seen journalists writing 2 match reports for T20 games. One to file if one team wins and another to file if the other team wins. They'll share a lot of matter, but the inflection will be quite different.
What are you looking for then, broadly speaking, sitting in the press box or wherever you're reporting from? You said it's an open canvas.
Yeah.
Are you looking for inspiration or just a moment of joy? Or
well, I'm looking for good cricket. Yeah, I'm looking for an even contest between bat and ball. I'm looking for characters to reveal themselves. Great cricket isn't always conducive to great writing, but it certainly helps a lot. Probably my most consistently enjoyable daily experience of writing was the 2005 Ashes series, because every day held something fantastic, and the characters were larger than life, and there was a sense of coming to the end of a period of great Australian dominance. There was a sense of new personalities emerging. There was a sense that you were in a country that was completely captivated by what was going on. You just felt so lucky to be there. And I know that the other journalists around me were as excited as anybody, because in the end we are all enthusiasts for the game. We're there really because we want to be. Sometimes we overstay our welcome, and you'd never want to become a bore, but I think, if you ask most journalists who in that press box, they'd think they are incredibly fortunate to be where they are, not least of all because they don't have to go into the office, which these days in journalism is a pretty depressing place.
You strike me as someone for whom cynicism does not come easily or naturally. How have you managed to stay enthusiastic about this game you've written about for so long?
I'm glad you say that, Andrew, because journalists are renowned for their cynicism. It's almost a badge of honour. The way in which I've resisted it is probably for the aforementioned reason, is that I sort of cut my ties with it on a daily basis back in 1995, because I think nothing would be more conducive to hating what you do than having to work day to day in a contemporary media environment or a contemporary office. It'd be terribly disillusioning and disappointing. When I left in 95, I sensed that probably at some stage I'd go back to working in an office. I just thought I'd try out freelance and see what it was like. But in the ensuing years, my interests and the interests of large media companies have diverged to the extent that I suspect ne'er the twain shall meet.
You've become an institutionalised freelancer.
Well, I guess so, yeah. I think I'm unemployable in any other way.
What a place to be. Was this always going to be your path, Gideon? Were you always going to make a life out of writing words?
It's hard to see what else I would have done. I think I sort of subsided into journalism because I wasn't really capable of very much else. I was a bookish youngster who liked English.
You were born in England?
I was born in England, went to school in Geelong. The only guiding principle I had when I was sort of doing HSC was that I really wasn't terribly interested in going to university. I really thought I've just had a bit too much of that. I'd actually quite like to move out of home and make a living. And in those days, well, even then there weren't too many ways to do it, but journalism was one of them, because there were no kind of educational prerequisites, at least in 1984.
No degree? No journalism degree?
No. And I sometimes say it was either journalism or ditch digging. They required a similar level of educational accomplishment, and I was too puny for ditch digging.
What was your path into the Age then? That was your first job.
Yeah, there was an exam that you did in Wilson Hall, I remember, in the middle of the year. If you did okay in the exam, you got an interview with someone. Then if you did okay in that interview, you got an interview with a panel of people. And I must have done okay on that because I got a cadetship.
What do you think they saw in you?
I have no idea. I was a kid from... I wasn't from Melbourne. I think probably they wanted to give a token position to someone who wasn't from Melbourne. I was from Geelong. Too difficult for me to evaluate. And I don't think I really... I'm surprised that I stood out, really. I was pretty callow and pretty... I think maybe I impressed them in the sense that it didn't look like I needed the job. Like I didn't really care whether I got it.
You weren't desperate.
Because I can remember at the interview with with the editor and his various minions, I remember they asked me, how would you improve the Age? And I said I'd get rid of the Melbourne living section, the lifestyle section, because I think that lifestyle stuff is just tedious and meretricious. And
did you use that word?
Probably did. And
that's probably what got you hired, that word.
Well, and I think they laughed. I remember them laughing and telling me that it was really popular. And I said, well, it doesn't interest me in the slightest.
Popular with advertisers too, I expect.
Yeah, it probably was. that, of course, because I was young and stupid, that had never occurred to me. But it just, I looked at the Age and I thought the things that I liked in it were... I'm not even sure I knew all that many journalists on the Age. One journalist that I did know, whose name I did know, was Philippa Hawker, who wrote these very funny, acerbic singles reviews in the Green Guide. And she's a good friend of mine. She's still a good friend of mine. Lives around the corner. She was the best person at my wedding. But she was the journalist that I really wanted to meet. The Michelle Grattons of the world held no interest for me at all. But someone who wrote funny singles reviews, yeah, that sounds like the kind of cool thing that I might be into.
Huh. What rounds were you put on in your cadetship?
Oh, you're getting into minute detail here. I think I did 6 months in the newsroom, doing chores, things like shipping times, the Muslim prayer times, sun, the moon and the planets, water storage levels.
Wow.
You did kind of cheesy little pick stories occasionally.
Were those things of interest to you, those details you just mentioned?
Not especially, no. I was just killing time and enjoying living away from home. I think that was what was exciting, coming to Melbourne for the first time, having a bit of financial independence, discovering women and alcohol, not necessarily in that order of preference. And then after 6 months I got sent to the business section, and which was curious because I'd failed mathematics at HSC level. Someone just had a whimsical sense of humour, and I'd never read the business section before. But I stayed. I stayed there. I got trained to do the stock market report, and I found that interesting. It was an area that I knew nothing about. I started writing kind of investment stories, and in 86, I was 20. There were actually a number of very big takeovers in Australia. Coles bid for Myer, Bond Corporation bid for Castlemaine Tuies, and Robert Holmes Court bid for BHP. And it just so happened that about 3 or 4 senior people had left the business section, and I got the opportunity to cover those stories as a very callow youth who was so stupid that he didn't know what he didn't know. But I really enjoyed them. Getting the opportunity to follow a kind of an evolving story and getting to make contacts with people on either side of a takeover, having the opportunity to see your byline every day, often sometimes on the front page, was exciting and stimulating. And I looked around at my contemporaries who were at university, and I thought, well, who's got the better life here? This is fantastic. And I wrote a book. I got asked to write a book.
We'll come to that.
Yeah. But, I got a lot of... Journalism is a very much a young... What certainly was in those days, a young person's game. If you had youth and vitality and naivety and a bit of energy, you could kind of go places quite quickly.
You were up to the challenge of writing about something which you had no experience or even interest in.
The essence of journalism.
Did you embrace the idea of being the dumbest person in the room and asking dumb questions?
Good question.
Maybe not dumb, but naive.
Yeah, naive questions. Yeah, for sure. I had a good mentor. Steve Bartholomew's was sort of the senior investment writer in the section, and he was very generous with his sort of technical advice. Didn't make me feel shamefully ignorant. I can remember quite vividly reading the annual report of Carlton United Breweries and seeing that they had debt. I went to Steve, do you know this company has debt? Completely unfamiliar with the concept of gearing or leverage. And he very patiently explained to me the relationship between equity and debt. And I went, wow, how long's this been going on? That's very powerful knowledge to give me. I feel as though I understand the world a lot better. I probably told my friends about this debt. Very interesting, this debt stuff. You don't want too much of it, but it's very useful in its place. Dumb questions. I didn't mind in a safe environment being that dumb person. I used to, when I even then, there were very good files in the business section of The Age. Actually, you're bringing quite a few things back to me now. In those days, you used to clip stories. So, and they used to, stick them onto bits of paper. So you could take out the file and you could read the history of all the press reports on a company for the last 20 or 30 years. And from that, maybe I got the habit of creating chronologies. Because, if I knew that I had to report a company's annual meeting the next day, I'd take the file home overnight and school myself in it, because I wanted to be conversant with it. I wanted to know who the characters were who were appearing. I wanted to know what the issues were confronting the company. It excited me if I saw a truck driving down the road with a corporate logo on it. I go, oh, I know who owns that truck, and I sort of know what that truck's doing, and I know who the competitors are with that company in that market, and I kind of understand it, the size of that company and how it sits in relation to all the other companies in Australia. And that was exciting because I'd never given it any thought before. So, even though initially the business section looked like a hardship posting for the mathematically innumerate, it soon became an exciting and steep and stimulating learning curve.
Is there something ironic about being a 20-year-old, poorly salaried journalist writing about the very rich?
I was a cadet. I was a first and second and third year cadet. I was earning $18,000-$19,000. It did seem slightly ridiculous, but I kind of liked that. I never aspired to being part of the system that I was writing about. I did actually have opportunities at various stages to go to join investment banks and stockbroking firms. That was how ridiculous the 1980s were, that you would get offered jobs in a broking house. Would you like to become our media analyst? Would you like to become our brewing analyst?
Because they'd seen your name in the business section.
And bizarrely they thought that I was some sort of expert on the subject. I got offered the job to go and work at some merchant banks, which was absurd. I mean, the 80s was a very weird period in that sense because financial markets had been deregulated. Prior knowledge was trading at a considerable discount because it was felt the rules were so completely new and they required sort of new fashioned thinking. So maybe, headhunters thought lateral idea, employ a guy from a newspaper. And I did know some journalists who went off and joined the financial industry, but I was having too much fun. It really was fun. And it was weirdly empowering too. I was just a kid from Geelong, and all of a sudden I was writing about all these rich and important people and, kind of being a bit irreverent about it.
I get the sense that your curiosity about the world and everything you didn't know was really powering you at that time. Yeah. And continues to power you, clearly.
I think so, yeah. I was quite a shy person. I think I am still quite a shy person, but journalism is a tremendous license for your curiosity. you can ask questions in journalism that you can't under any other circumstances. And people weirdly feel as though they have to answer them. Sometimes it amazes me what people will say to a journalist.
That's a bit of a recurring theme on this podcast, speaking to journalists. What is your opinion on why people talk to journalists, Gideon?
Well, of course, sometimes they don't, because you are a journalist. And sometimes people feel insecure speaking openly around journalists. I've certainly had experience of that as well. But sometimes, people do want to unburden themselves. People are attracted by the idea of a solicitous listener. Because a lot of people talk in this life and not a lot of people listen. So if you pull up a chair and say, tell me what your story is, that's quite attractive to a certain proportion of people.
Yes, a large proportion, I would say. Except those who perhaps have something to lose by telling a story.
Or something to hide, exactly.
Yes. You mentioned Steve Bartholomew's as an early mentor. Were there others who took an interest in you and took you under their wings?
My business editor was a guy called Malcolm Schmidtke, and I think anyone who ever worked with Malcolm would tell you that he treated everyone alike. He was enormously interested in your welfare. He was enormously dedicated to making other people look good. He was professionally very rigorous, but he had a personal warmth to him that made him very unusual among managers that I've experienced in daily journalism. I mean, journalism is abysmally managed most of the time because people don't go into it to manage. They go in it to write. They go in it to tell stories. People get thrust into management positions either because they're not very good at being reporters, or no one else wants to do it, or it's a possibility of promotion and eminence, or there are some exceptions to it who have a genuine interest in creating good sections, but they're pretty rare. So I haven't encountered many great editors, I'd have to say. But, perhaps fortunately, most editors have just tended to leave me alone and let me do what I want to do. Maybe that makes them good editors. I don't know. But I haven't had a lot of editorial direction, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I've been quite good over maybe the second half of my career at just finding a way to work with the system but kind of subtly against its grain at the same time. Like if an editor comes to me with an idea for a story, they're usually pretty bad ideas, but there's usually some sort of potential in them. And you go, well, actually, that's not a very good idea, but if you did it this way, it might be better. And generally speaking, editors are pretty amenable to that. They just want words. They just want content.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter to them all that much about how you get there, as long as you get something.
Was that a late realisation for you or an early one?
It was just a sort of a natural outcome of my personality, I think. I always figured that if I was going to do stories, I should enjoy them as much as I possibly could, and I should find ways to make them enjoyable. Because if you did enjoy them, then you would write well, and you would communicate your enthusiasm and commitment to the topic to your readers. I think readers are pretty shrewd about working out when you're just phoning it in, when you're just faking it. I don't like faking it.
Fair enough. Around this point in your life, I believe you came up with the idea to write your first book. Is that correct?
Well, it was someone else's idea.
Okay.
Michael Wilkinson was a publisher, little firm called Information Australia. He read a feature that I'd written in The Age about like a week in the BHP takeover battle, which was then being investigated by the National Companies and Securities Commission. I think he liked it. He rang me up. He said, "How would you feel about writing a book?" And like I said, I didn't know what I didn't know. So I said, "Yeah, sure, great idea."
Gideon is rolling his eyes.
I really did. I really didn't know what I was doing.
Huh.
I can remember writing. I could remember writing it quite vividly because I wrote it at the weekends on the Age ATEX system. We'd just gone online. Oh, not online. We weren't even online. What am I saying? We'd just gone to VDTs. So, and the business section was actually the first.
What's VDT?
Oh, Andrew,
Please
a video display terminal.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, like a tethered PC. Not even a PC because they weren't autonomous. They were dumb terminals connected to a mainframe. So I just started writing a book off the top of my head, really. It was as simple as that. I'd do it on Saturday nights. I'd go into the Age after playing cricket and I would take in an electric skillet and a Maggi reheatable meal, and I would heat that up to eat, and I would basically write all night. And at the end of the process, I think I had a 70,000 word book, wrote it in a few months. I printed it out. This is how primitive it was. The printer was one of those printers that worked in a continuous scroll. So I actually handed Michael a kind of a codex version of the book, which he must, now it occurs to me, must have completely rekeyed in order to get the book done, which probably accounts for the large number of typographical errors in it. Yeah, but that's how rudimentary it was. And, a few months later I had a book in my hand and I thought, wow,
Were you
that was
happy
easy.
with it?
Not really, no. No, I remember opening the first page and finding a typographical error in the first paragraph and thinking, oh, fuck, I'm never looking at this again. And I don't think I have.
What was it called?
It's called The Battle for BHP.
How did it go in the market?
I have no idea. I don't think I ever received a royalty statement.
You got an advance of some sort?
I must have got some sort of advance, but I can't remember that.
Wow. But someone asked you to write a book?
Someone asked me to write a book and it just sounded like something I hadn't done before, and why not?
Holy shit.
Yeah.
It took you a few months.
It took me a few months.
70,000 words.
Yeah. I was working full time at the time, of course. Worked during the week at the Age, and then I'd come into the Age at the weekend and do the work in there. I didn't write another book until the early 90s, where I wrote The Cricket War.
But hold on, you must have... Was there reporting involved in the Battle for BHP? Were you interviewing people?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I was kind of doing it simultaneously with writing the story, with covering the story in the Age. So there was a degree of duplication, a degree of overlap between the two efforts, and the story was evolving while I was writing it. And I think the book was actually published the month before the share market crash. So it was I couldn't have picked probably a worse time for a sort of a provisional judgment. The story was still in progress.
But suddenly you weren't just a journalist at the Age, you were now an author. Did that change how others saw you in any measurable way?
I don't think so. No, didn't change the way I saw myself.
Because there wouldn't have been too many, 21-year-old authors at the Age at that point?
I can't really remember looking around and getting a sense of that.
Huh.
I think I might even have still been a cadet.
Wow.
Maybe I was a first year. Maybe I was a D grade journalist. Maybe I'd just been graded. Yeah, I would have been graded by the time the book came out. So I was a D in the days when you had D grades.
So I'm getting the sense there was not a lot of pride in the fact that you had published a book about which you
Well,
didn't
there wasn't a
care
lot of fanfare, and it had seemed pretty straightforward, frankly. It didn't seem like I'd scaled a mountain. it's not like it changed. It's not like I immediately wanted to do another book either. I just wanted to carry on being a daily journalist. It's amazing. Yeah, I mean, now you say it, I'm sort of slightly surprised. Maybe I didn't think otherwise, but I can remember opening the box of books and thinking, oh, okay, that's what that was about. And then there wasn't a huge response to it, so I just threw it over my shoulder and carried on working.
And what did the next few years hold for you leading up to the next book, which is one that you pitched, I think. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, I went overseas. I went to, in 1989, I decided that I was getting a bit stale. I thought I'd like to go to London to work for a while. So I went to London for a couple of years and worked as a stringer for the business sections of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. There was quite a lot of corporate activity related to Australian companies and entrepreneurs in London at the time, so there was quite a lot to report. And while I was there, in fact, I started writing about cricket because I was going to quite a lot of cricket. I was a member at Middlesex and a member at Surrey, and I started going to the odd test match and writing pieces for The Age. And I hooked up with a fanzine called Johnny Miller 96 Not Out, which I doubt anyone will remember now, but I remember finding it in Sports Pages bookshop in Charing Cross Road. It was a kind of a cricket satire mag, a bit like Private Eye, run by a guy called Billy Cotton who lived in Bristol out of his bedroom. And I just thought, well, this sounds like fun. I should write something for it. I slipped something in the post and he published it, and I started writing about cricket that way. And I contributed some pieces. I started contributing some pieces to Wisden Cricket Monthly, which was a magazine that I'd always enjoyed reading. And the editor there, David Frith, was very generous, actually. I mean, he published me virtually straight away. I can remember sending the piece off, and within a week I'd had an acceptance of it. I thought, oh, that was easier. Maybe there's something in this game after all.
Was there a sense of pride seeing your name in Wisden Monthly for the first time? More so than the first book?
Maybe. I was certainly happy to do it because I really admired David and I liked the publication. I think I was just pushing it to see how far it would go. It's not like I'd had an overwhelming desire to be a cricket writer either. I was very happy writing about business. I found business very stimulating. I think I wrote about cricket because I was probably a bit frustrated with what I was reading about cricket. There are a few writers I liked, but a lot of stuff I didn't really. I thought, well, I could probably do better than that myself. Might as well have a crack. So I thought, well, I can either sit around and complain, or I can have a go myself, and that's what I ended up doing.
Walk me through the process of finding that idea for your next book.
I came back to Australia and I went back to The Age and I worked as a sort of a feature writer for sort of from the end of 1990 through to late 1991. I got approached by Max Such, who was the editor of the Independent Monthly, to become their staff writer. You probably don't remember the Independent Monthly. Very few people do.
John Birmingham talked about it.
Oh yeah, of course, Burmo. Yeah,
on this podcast. Quite a few episodes ago.
Yes, I knew Burmo from there. People like Ashley Hay, Kathy Bale. I was the staff writer in Melbourne, so I had a desk and a filing cabinet in the office at BRW and a phone, and that was about all I had. Which was a good experience actually, because I when you're sort of in a big media organisation, you take many of the kind of the comforts and privileges that you enjoy for granted. Access to good files, for one thing. Access to a travel budget. access to reasonable levels of sub-editing. This back in those days anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Sitting at the Independent Monthly without a pot to piss in was interesting, different. There weren't many jobs around like it. Maybe it was a kind of a prototype for jobs now. Now I think about it, which I haven't really. But I began to think up stories that I could do, longer form stories, because it was a monthly magazine. And the irony is that the piece that I stimulated the cricket war was a piece I did for something else entirely, a magazine called FYI, which was a kind of a lifestyle adjunct to BRW. And I realised it was the 15th anniversary of World Series Cricket's first Super Test coming up. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And now I think about it, no one's really written anything about World Series Cricket since the time. There were some contemporaneous books written, but it was kind of like one of those historical episodes that had been completely swallowed up and was in danger of being forgotten, even though so much of cricket at the time was as a result of its aftershocks. So I remember thinking, oh, how do you do that? How do you ring cricketers up? I'd interviewed some cricketers in England. I remember just ringing up Ian Chappell and saying, how would you feel about talking about World Series cricket? He said, sure. So I remember going up to see Chappelli and sitting on his front porch and him talking fascinatingly for several hours about it. I thought, well, that's a great story. Why hasn't someone written this story already? Well, I might as well do it myself. So I did the piece, probably did like 3,000 or 4,000 words, and by the end of it I thought, oh, gee, this would be a good book. So, I mean, I had no reputation as a cricket writer at all.
Did that help or hinder you?
Wasn't a insurmountable handicap. I can remember pitching it to publishers. I pitched it to 11 publishers, turned it down. I didn't even get in the door.
What did you send in a proposal?
I sent in a one-pager or a two-pager.
Right.
But I can remember I can remember being in the fax room of BRW and talking to someone. I can't even remember who it was. It might have been James Dunn, who was editing Personal Investment at the time, and he told me about this new publisher called Text. And I thought, well, I haven't tried them, and I faxed my two-pager to Di Gribble, and half an hour later she called me back and she said, come in tomorrow and we'll talk. And I walked out with a contract. Wow, that was easy. So I just set about writing it. Didn't really have a model for the book in mind. Thought, I'll go and interview some people. Yeah, that's what I'll do. I went to some sort of past players associations and got telephone numbers and addresses for people, and I hunted them down. I piggybacked off my meagre Independent Monthly resources by using their telephone and their computer. I had a Mac Classic, and I used to take it home. You're too young to remember Mac Classics. They were big, like TV screens, and big keyboards, and I'd put the monitor under one arm and the keyboard under another, and I'd call a cab and go home, plug it in, and I'd write all weekend with a few hours sleep. And then I'd go back to work on Monday. And I would do interviews in the evening on the phone, because a lot of people were interstate. I'd say, I'll ring you at 8 o'clock, and we'd talk for an hour, like, say, someone like Robbie Langer or Craig Sargent, or so just chat to them. And Peter Toohey.
You're recording these conversations or taking notes? Or
I think I was recording them mostly. Yeah. And they were great. And people were incredibly responsive and accessible in those days. And a lot of these players had kind of left cricket without very much more than their memories, and hadn't been asked about them in any great detail subsequently. But they were very generous with their time, and I think probably part of it appreciated the interest being taken in them.
That idea of what you mentioned earlier about you ask people their story and often they'll tell you.
Yeah. Although, interestingly, I found with cricketers, leastways the cricketers of that generation and the generation before, because I subsequently did a book about cricket in the 50s and 60s, they were much more comfortable talking about other cricketers than they were about themselves. I think that's a factor of being part of a team game and a egalitarian culture, that if you talk too much about yourself, it smacks of big noting. It took me a little while to work that out. But if you asked players about other players, they were often really forthcoming because they admired other players' skills, or they were kind of interested in their personalities, or they understood their stories. So, in the course of doing a book like that, you accrete a lot of information about people that you're then able to put to that person. So-and-so told me this, or so-and-so told me that. What do you remember about that? So-and-so says this. So it was a good introduction to kind of long-form interviewing and management of information, and sort of adducing a sympathetic or interested response in your interlocutor.
What do you wish you knew while you were writing that book that you now know about writing books?
It's a good question. It's funny, I'm actually reprinting it later this year with Bloomsbury.
The Cricket War. The
Cricket War. And I thought about revising it, but then I thought, no, it's a book of its time. It was written by a 27-year-old enthusiast. It was a sort of a second draft of history. There's additional historical context now that places the events in perspective, but I wasn't to know that at the time. I don't claim powers of omniscience. I think I can just leave it as it is. I think what I do differently.
Or what do you now do differently in your work?
Look, Andrew, journalism is pretty simple, frankly. A half-intelligent person can learn the principles of it in about 6 weeks, really. It's all, after that, it's all a matter of degree and detail. Know who you're talking to, listen to what they say, be well prepared. I sort of knew that at the time, and I've just kind of stuck to those first principles since then. I think I'd be more ambitious, I'd be more confident, I'd be more expansive. I think probably in some ways each book has been a little bit more that way over time, just simply because I've been down this route so many times now. But in the end, it's all pretty simple stuff. I wouldn't want to make it sound any more sophisticated than it actually is.
Wasn't the first manuscript of that like 250,000 words?
Oh, it was massive. It was ridiculous. It was totally bloated. One thing I did learn, a very useful attribute or a very useful skill, was how to cut my own work.
Oh.
Yeah.
What have you learned about that? Because I struggle with that myself
today. Oh. I mean, I was the first effort was incredibly undisciplined. I put in everything because I was kind of fascinated by it. It was all fascinating. It was all new to me. But then you had to have a bit of a pause, go back to it and think, how much of this is interesting to me and how much of this is potentially interesting to others.
Thinking about the audience a little.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, ultimately, I don't think about the audience all that much. I mean, I have to say, ultimately, it's all about enjoying myself. But at the same time, I get very excited when I do a book. Like, I'm really excited. Like, I do think it's the most interesting subject that's ever been explored. That is a recurrent experience for me. I fall completely in love with what I'm doing and totally lose perspective on its significance. But then I kind of pull myself together at the end, and I can be quite cold-blooded about it. And you should be cold as a journalist. I'm not writing the Gospels. I'm writing journalism. So, and a narrative's got to have pace, and it's got to have shape, and it's got to have form, and it's got to have light and shade. And they're the things that you go back to and you kind of reintroduce to your writing. You kind of chisel it out of the huge block of marble that you've created. I probably don't create blocks of marble quite as big as I used to. That was a bloody big block of marble, though.
Your biggest, would you say?
No, I've written more than that. Oh, God, yeah. I mean, I've written books of 200,000 words. The Office is 200,000 words. One of a Kind, my book on Bankers Trust, is 200,000 words. Every book benefits from a significant cut, though. That's something that I've learned.
It's quite a skill to learn to do that yourself rather than relying on an editor to do
I wouldn't trust anyone else to do it.
Good
quite
point.
Frankly.
Fair enough.
I've got a pretty good feeling, I think, for my strengths and weaknesses.
So you're not precious about thinking this paragraph is immaculate, it must stay at all costs.
No, I was cutting a paragraph yesterday that I really loved. I thought, I worked really hard to get the information in this paragraph. It's a beauty, but it's not for this book. It's the wrong book. It's a great paragraph, but it's in the wrong place. I'll keep it, but no.
Is there an offcuts file somewhere of everything you've ever cut?
I'm not sentimental about that either, really. No, people have asked me at various times whether I keep kind of multiple drafts of my books, and I don't really. I don't. Or at least those that I do, I'd be ashamed to go back and look at.
Right. You wrote an excellent essay for Kill Your Darlings a few years ago about the process of writing The Office. 2012 it was published, I believe. I read it a few years ago. It's since been paywalled, so I'll link it in the show notes for interested listeners. But you described that at length the I don't know if difficulty is the right word, but the process of writing that book, which took you 3 years. You went from how you pitched it to how you found a publisher for it, and how it kind of changed shape as you went through, and
for sure.
The idea of coming in here and shutting the door and shutting yourself away from your wife and child.
In the old house, the baby change table was just outside the door, so I was very much interpenetrated with the household. There was just no avoiding it. I didn't want to avoid it, but it was the first book I'd done since becoming a father, so it was an entirely new experience.
How did that idea for writing about office culture, office life, come about? Which you do cover in the essay as well, for the listeners' benefit.
I think I can't remember what I said, Andrew.
Well,
I hope I tell the same story. I think I'd always liked novels and films and television series set in workplaces. I'm very interested in people's attachment to work. I think it tells you an awful lot about them. Work takes up such a huge amount of our conscious existence, and yet we often look past it. We often derogate it we often minimalise it. We try to avoid the idea that it is who we are. But it is who I am, to a very great degree. So I think I'd had the idea kind of at the back of my mind since about 2001. And I'd gone on kind of collecting books or thinking in that vein until I kind of felt ready to pitch it. And I pitched it to a bunch of publishers, and I went with one of them, and it was an interesting experience. I didn't have an agent at that stage, and I've actually got rid of my agent since then, but to go round and explain it to people, some people got it straight away. Some people went, oh, yeah. And then some people went, yeah. I don't know how you're going to get that on the transcript, the difference between the ways in which I've expressed that. But I got a lot of response of, yeah, we really like your writing, but we'd really like you to do the big book. The big book. I don't know what the fucking big book is, really. And if I do work it out, I doubt that I'll have any interest in writing it. There's a kind of a sort of a cardboard cutout work of Australian history, popular Australian history, that I think works well in discount stores and exposes well on Sunrise, but that I have absolutely no interest in exploring. Periodically people throw a topic at me and I go, that sounds like a book for someone else. Like, have you ever read anything I've written? Because that doesn't sound like me at all. The other thing was that The Office was an international story, and I think there's a lot of parochialism in Australian publishing. You know, we write Australian books that tell Australian stories for Australian readers, and for obvious reasons, The Office was a global story. I'm not sure there's all that much that's hugely distinctive about Australian office culture. It was going to involve some travelling. It was going to involve trying to. I didn't actually have a specific model for the book in mind. I was in search of a model that would enable me to tell the story. So it was very exploratory. So, just to repeat, a lot of people went, yeah, great, wow, playground for a writer. And other people went, oh, yeah, I don't really see how we could position that. And that was fine. But the people that I did end up working with were very good. Fung Ling Kong at MEP was fantastic to work with. And in the end, I mean, effort almost killed me, as I say in that piece, because you just kind of completely lose touch with the outside world. My domestic circumstances kind of rooted me to this spot and rooted me to this seat, and there wasn't a lot of there was movement between me and the change table, but there wasn't a lot of movement outside that. I wasn't getting a lot of sleep, for one thing. I was writing very early in the day and very late at night, and I could see the deadline coming up. I knew I'd meet it. I've always met my deadlines, but in the end, I sensed the truth in that remark that books aren't so much finished as abandoned. You just get to a point where you just can't do any more. I could have worked on that book for another 10 years. But I don't think I'd be talking to you about it now. The act of finishing the book has enabled me to get some perspective on it and to talk about it.
Are you happy with how it turned out?
I haven't really looked at it all that closely.
I mean, it was published in 2012.
2012, yeah.
It won a few awards.
It was as good as I could do in the time allowed and with the resources that I had at my disposal. There's nothing I regret about it. I wouldn't mind starting it again, but that's the way I always feel. It'd be wonderful to start all our books again, incorporating all the lessons that we learned in writing the book. But we don't have that luxury. That's why we do other books, to apply those lessons.
That one took you 3 years or thereabouts. Was that the longest writing process you'd had for a single project?
Yeah.
How do you balance or measure or judge what is a good way to spend your time in terms of money coming in versus time invested?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I wish I had a better answer for you than I just do what I want, really. And common sense will tell me when I'm spending too much time on something. And these days, my family's economic circumstances play a part in that as well. I probably can't be quite as quixotic in the subjects that I pursue, but I'm still pretty quixotic. And my wife says that I'm happier when I'm doing it that way. I'm lucky that I have the daily journalism to subsidise the book writing. That's as straightforwardly as I can put it. The journalism is adequately paid, and I live pretty frugally. Books are really my only extravagance.
You walk a lot of places.
I walk a lot of places.
You don't drink.
Don't drink. Don't drive a car. Don't smoke. All things that I used to do, but I've gradually sort of sloughed off all my expensive and bad habits. So I lead a life of almost Puritan austerity, just me and my laptop.
And your 5 tons of books.
Yeah, I think I'm good at producing something at the end. Like, I don't waste a lot of effort. I spend a lot of time and effort on what I do, but I don't. But it's always with an outcome in mind. That's just the discipline of journalism. I've been doing it for so long now, I don't really know any other way.
But you've been a long-term freelancer as well, and that comes with its own financial rollercoaster.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Are there times when it's been close to the bone?
Or? Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we don't take holidays, for instance. My wife understands that I'm the sole breadwinner in our household, and that there are some luxuries that we can't afford. But around tax times, you go, "Jeez, where am I going to find that money from?" And sometimes you do your tax return and you think, "Shit, I worked." There was a year, 2014-15, I think, where I did my tax return. I thought 80% of my time I spent writing books that year, and I made $14,000. I went, bugger, what else are you going to do? But it was a pause for brief self-reflection.
Yeah.
That, you pour a lot in, and oftentimes you don't get a lot out. But you're not doing it for that reason anyway.
Huh. Is the Australian cricket writing your most reliable and biggest source of income?
Yes, yeah. For a long time, for quite a few years, the monthly was my biggest source of income. And of course I had to kiss that goodbye in 2008 or 2009, whenever it was. That was interesting to kiss goodbye to your biggest source of freelance income because you weren't comfortable with who you were working with, but things turned up.
Yeah, you wrote about that for The Age, I believe, in a story called When the Media Becomes the Story, which I'll link to in the show notes. You essentially quit on principle because you didn't like how the editor of the monthly at the time had been treated.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't a staff member, but I was the biggest contributor to it.
And the monthly paid $1 a word.
Paid $1 a word, which is pretty good. I liked working for it. It was a good organ to write for. It offered space and resources and allowed me to explore areas of interest that were not possible in daily journalism. But
There's still a couple of
Yeah,
old
there's a
issues
couple of
floating
copies.
around right next to me.
Yeah, they were sitting in
2008.
a box. But I must say that since I stopped writing for them, I cancelled my subscriptions. I threw out my monthly bags, and I never looked at it again.
Mm.
And I don't really regret leaving.
Mm. Fair enough. You did what you had to be done.
I did what I felt I had to do.
Mm.
I didn't have to do it, but I felt comfortable with it.
Coming towards the end, we've been talking nearly an hour and a half for your
Easy, wasn't
information. You were worried you wouldn't have anything
Yeah, I
to
know.
talk about.
Yeah.
In late 2014, something terrible happened in cricket when a young man died on a cricket pitch unexpectedly, and it shocked the nation. And you, for me personally, became a figure to look to because you knew and know a lot about cricket, and you became a kind of public spokesperson, I suppose, or you helped the rest of us try to make sense of this incomprehensible thing that happened. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
I probably was trying to make sense of it myself. I was sitting here. I was sitting in this very seat when I found out about it. I can remember I think it might have been a Tuesday. I had a weekly column to write. I was thinking, not much to write about this week. And I had the lid of the computer up, and I was following the first class scores, and I noticed that something's happened in the New South Wales South Australia game. They're not playing for some reason. So I went to Fox Sports, and they had some footage of the incident. And I went, oh shit, I don't want to look at that. That looks really bad. I put it down, and I thought, he went down very heavily, like a man who, that's not the way that we'd become very used in cricket to head blows where players walked away. And they just sort of shook themselves like a wet dog and carried on. But this was obviously sort of qualitatively different. And I remember following it for the next few days, and it was pretty apparent that things were not going well. And I can remember I was talking to Ed Cowan, my friend Ed Cowan, on the phone a couple of days later, and he said, I'm going into the hospital because he's not going to make it. I thought, jeez, okay, what am I going to say about that? And I think we all did that. We all went, we don't really have the vocabulary or the grammar to write about this, and I can't even remember what I wrote. It was, but you had to come up with something.
We are talking about Philip Hughes, of course, for listeners who aren't familiar. It was an enormous story and still is, and the reverberations are still being felt, I would think it's fair to say.
Yeah,
it's never too far from players' minds, I imagine.
I find it unsettling even thinking about it now. I remember going into Lateline to talk to Tony Jones, and I remember Tony ringing me up and saying, "Oh, would you mind coming on? We can't get anybody else." And I sort of stoically said, "Oh yeah, no problem at all." And I can remember sitting there on my own in the studio, looking at this camera, looking down the barrel of the camera, listening to the show on the earpiece, and listening to the saying, "Just about to come to you," like 15 seconds. And I thought, shit, maybe I can't do this. Maybe I actually can't do it. I actually feel really upset sitting here and having to talk with. I don't know what I'm going to say. And I just got through it. I can't remember what I said. And, line goes dead and you walk out. Yeah, that was an interesting experience. It was certainly, I mean, that as far as stories concerned, that's been, I think every journalist who reported it would say it's been the most emotionally confronting because it was so abnormal. And Hughes was such a well-liked figure. You know, I'd been on the 2013 tour of England, and he was a lovely young man, like a really lovely young man who got dropped during the series and handled it really well, and you know, there was just so much to like about him that if you'd scripted it, no one would have believed it was possible.
Yeah, I watched that Late Line interview with Tony Jones at the time, and I went back and rewatched it last night.
Really? Right. What did I say?
Well, it's a 12-minute interview, and
12 minutes, bloody hell. Seemed like about 2 hours, of course.
You just speak eloquently and beautifully about just giving context, like we were talking about earlier. You, as a journalist, someone who has studied the game so much over the years, that's why we look to you in times like that. And it was just a great public service, I thought.
Thanks. I remember one thing about it. I remember one question. Now I recollect. Tony asked me to say something about helmets or umpiring or something like that. You know, he was we were looking for a sort of an explanation of it. You know, who could we blame? And I remember immediately thinking, oh no, please don't let us blame anyone yet. Let's just come to terms with this loss before we move on to trying to analyse it. Let's not pretend that we're completely impervious or that we're capable at this point of a disinterested perspective. Let's just feel it. Let's just feel it. And I did, and I can feel it still.
How do you look back on that incident and what followed in terms of sport in its wider context, which exists for our entertainment and pleasure largely?
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that I found the thing that really intrigued me or stimulated me in that environment was how naturally people responded to it. They didn't need cues from the media. They didn't need help from the administration. Things happened spontaneously, and people responded decently. It was one of those periods where you just felt your work was pointless. You weren't adding anything. I'm interested that you say that I helped, because I didn't think that I helped at all. I was just, it was your job to say something, and you just had to say it, even though you probably didn't have the words for it. But I can remember I played that weekend. I played that week.
You played that night.
I played that. You're right. I did. I played that night. It was a Tuesday, so I went to training that night. And the guy bounced me, and he followed through saying, sorry. We're all of a sudden being a lot gentler round each other. And I went out to bat at the weekend. I opened, and I took first ball, and I didn't wear a helmet. And I can remember the guy, as he marked out his run-up, saying, are you sure about this? We laid out our bats on the pitch before the game. I went out to guard, and I can remember him and it wasn't actually entirely sort of friendly, you know. And I said, oh, no, mate, we're fine. You're not quick enough to bother me. And, you know, the cricket kind of got back to normal. There was something pleasing about getting out there and just doing it without having to think about it too much. Funnily enough, the best refuge from that experience was playing it. It was just being in a cricket environment and watching how people looked after one another and getting a sense of that the game was still pretty good. It was still a good game to play, and in the end the game didn't matter terribly much. And and at the same time mattered an awful lot.
How do you think about sport's role in human life? Because it takes up it's a big part of your work. You think about it a lot, and you watch it, and you write about it. Yeah, where does sport fit into everyday life and society and culture for you?
Well, my biggest experience of sport isn't the watching of it or the writing about it, it's the playing. It's the playing and the community that I'm part of at my club, and the physical, sensual pleasure of performing a human movement. And every now and again, because I'm not very good, but every now and again I get a glimpse of the possible. And it's beautiful. It's ecstatic. There's just no feeling like it. It's better than any sentence you could possibly write. It's more challenging than any sentence you could possibly write. Maybe it's more challenging for me, but I'm having a hit tomorrow with the friends that I have a hit with every week over winter. It's great fun. I'm looking forward to it. I'm really excited about it. You see, there's a bat in the kitchen. There's my bat rack upstairs. I love it. I've been doing it since I was a kid, and I never tire of it. I mean, my relationship to it has kind of changed in the sense that I don't think I'm a hugely community-minded person, but where sport's concerned, I am. Like, I feel very strongly that these are important social institutions that need looking after, and that bring us together in ways that other institutions don't.
It's kind of hard to be antisocial if you're playing on a team.
It is. And I think a lot of other institutions have kind of betrayed public trust. It's very easy for people to feel when they look at government institutions or financial institutions or religious institutions, or that what difference can I possibly make here? I feel completely depersonalised and alienated. But where sport's concerned, I still have a very powerful sense that you can put your shoulder to the wheel and feel it move and make a difference and contribute to an environment of trust and friendship and mutual support.
Is there a particular reason why you like the act of playing sport? Is it connected to the fact that your job is largely sedentary, sitting at a desk?
That's a good point. I mean, I think it's acutely sedentary because I don't go to an office. I don't leave home. But I do know that over summer, at least 3 times a week, 2 nights of practice and 1 day of a game, I'll have to get out of there and I'll have to express myself physically, and I'll have to be part of a cohesive whole, and I'll be outdoors and I'll be challenging myself and I'll be forgetting myself, because that's an important part of sport, is self-forgetting. You can't concentrate on anything else when you're playing sport. You know, I can go to training feeling burdened by the weight of the world, but by the end of training I've almost forgotten what I was worried about. Because even just getting into the nets for 10 minutes and hitting a ball and have someone ball bounces at you, it's fun, and it channels you, it directs you. You feel alive.
It's hard to think about deadlines when there's a ball coming at you.
Yeah.
Before this interview, I contacted one of our mutual editors who said that he's impressed how you can find big ideas in little things, such as the Office book idea.
Right.
And he compared you to Malcolm Gladwell in that you both have an ability to look at ordinary things and make them not just interesting but surprising. It seems to come naturally to you, and it's quite a remarkable skill.
I'm glad Will's a bit better at promoting himself than I am. Yes, well, yeah. I do see big stories in quite small things, I guess. But I think there are big stories in every damn thing. It's just there are no uninteresting stories, only uninteresting journalists.
Well, you've got 32 books published. You're working on your 33rd, is that correct?
Yeah, and the 34th.
What do you see? What do you want to direct your attention to in the future, or are you just happy to let your path go wherever it may?
Yeah, I finished the Trumper book, Stroke of Genius, thinking, fuck, I might not have another book in me.
That was a book that you wrote about a single photograph.
Yeah.
That's another small idea.
Yeah, very small idea.
Small thing.
Microscopic idea.
Sorry, I meant a big idea and a small thing.
Yeah. But I did it, and it was hard yakka. It was really hard yakka. I was doing it in 2015. I had to break off in the middle to go and cover the Ashes. I covered the World Cup. I was flailing at the time. I was really tired. I had a daughter going to school. I did feel at the end of that, geez, I might have my priorities completely wrong here. I feel almost like I'm just not quite present, or at least I'm chiefly present in my work, and maybe I'm just not sufficiently present for other people in my life. And I got to the end of it and I thought, well, I'm not going to rush into doing another book. I've very frequently had books backed up in the past. Like I've known exactly what I'm going to be doing next in the process of finishing the last thing. I'm a chain writer, like a chain smoker. I light one book with the burning end of the previous book. But in this case, I actually let it go. I just see what it feels like. I'll see what it feels like to have nothing in my life apart from work, apart from earning a living. And I did some things last year for The Guardian, and I did some features for the Oz, just things I was interested in, just ideas. Like I did a piece about mechanics institutes for The Australian. I did a piece about this very interesting anti-smoking campaigner for The Guardian. I did a piece about ICI House, Australia's first skyscraper, for The Guardian. Just bits of long form that weren't quite book length, but just to kind of experiment at a different length. Not everything has to be a book. Otherwise, if something comes along, I'll write it, but I don't feel any particular haste to find another subject. And then kind of 2 or 3 ideas sort of came to me, and they related to ideas that I'd previously had or things that I thought might be worthy of pursuing. And I found one, and I just thought, well, I'll keep plugging away at this and see how far I can get. And before I knew it, I thought, yeah, there's a book here. There's a book here. I'm not just making that up. I don't have to write this book, but this book's saying that it has to be written. So I kind of let the decision be made for me.
It's worked out pretty well for you so far. I hope it continues.
Yeah, well, I hope it does too. Otherwise, we're going to starve.
Thanks for talking to me, Gideon.
It's all right, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to Penmanship, and thank you to my guest, Gideon Haigh. You can find show notes to this episode at penmanshippodcast.com, and I've also included a few photographs of Gideon's incredible book library for you to check out. If you'd like to contact me, the best way to do so is via email. Andrew@penmanshippodcast.com is my address. If you enjoy this podcast, there are a couple of ways you can support it. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or wherever you happen to be listening to this audio, or you can share it with people in your life who love reading and talking about great Australian writing. The theme song is Eternally Yours by Laughing Clowns. That's it for now. Until next time.